Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Through Review 722. Today we're going to take a look at the new edition of Kill Team. Now this is the Kill Team Octarius box set, kind of introducing the new edition. And I don't know if this is the second, third, fourth, or fifth edition of Kill Team. Now, if you're going to be really technical about it, the first edition was kind of like a supplement, I believe in like the third or fourth edition of 40K, there was something in the core rulebook I didn't play back then. So that you could call that the first edition. And then with 7th edition 40K, there was an actual Kill Team box, which I used to have, I don't have it anymore. And that one, you'd actually play the 7th edition 40K rules at the time, but scaled way down. You needed the codexes for the different armies that you had in normal 40K to play the Kill Team. So you were basically playing 40K just with less models. And then you move forward a little bit further, and they came out with Shadow War Armageddon, which was kind of like in between 7th and 8th edition of 40K. And this was really kind of a Necromunda rule set applied to the normal 40K armies, but kind of Kill Team. They call everything in here Kill Teams, the different groups of troops that you'll put together will call the Kill Team. So this might be your 3rd edition of Kill Team. And then a couple of years ago, I want to say, was it 3 years ago? We had this edition here. This is what a lot of people might consider the 1st edition of Kill Team. And this one was a lot like 8th edition 40K, which was the edition at the time, but it wasn't exactly like it. You had somewhat different stats, a little bit different abilities, but really close to the same stat line. And you had command points and all that kind of stuff, and the whole balance between open narrative and match play. So a lot of people call this the 2nd edition of Kill Team because of the 1st edition box, whatever. So now we're up to 4 editions. This is the new edition here, the 2021 edition. This is the core rulebook for this. Now you get this in the big box. This will be available separately. And this is your core rules, everything you need to know to play, match play, narrative play, open play, and so on. And also in the box, you will get the Octarius book. Now, the box comes with 2 different kill teams, the Death Creed Corps, which is like a variant of the Imperial Guard, and then you also have some Orc Commandos, Orc Boy Commandos. So those are the 2 teams you get, and you get a ton of Orc-ish terrain. Now, I'm not going to show you any of the models or anything like that. There's going to be 5 billion videos unboxing it, showing you the sprues and stuff. I'm sure Ash at Gorilla Miniature will have it already painted up and have a battle report with all the new stuff in it. What I've been doing is actually playing through some of the different scenarios, match play, open play, narrative play, with some of the existing kill teams that I had from the last edition. I have, at last count, 11 different kill teams, because it's not hard to build a kill team for this. It's a very cost-effective game. You can probably spend anywhere from 30 to 50 bucks, 60 bucks, and have just a complete, well-rounded kill team, kind of depending on the faction and so on. So over the course of time, mostly since the time of Shadow War Armageddon, I started to accrue different kill teams. Now, I had picked up that original box back in 7th edition. That was kind of actually my first intro to 40K. At the time, was like, oh, I'll get into Kill Team, but then the new edition came out and all that stuff. Now, there is another book that will be available separately. This is the Compendium. Now, I'm under an NDA of sorts to not show you anything of this in this video this week, but next week, if enough people leave a comment, I will run through this, because this is what I've been playing with the kill teams, because I was more interested in getting in and playing the new edition than building and painting all of the stuff. Although, slight spoiler for the review portion, I am actually pretty excited to build and paint this stuff and play through some of the narrative campaign stuff in here. But we'll talk about that towards the end. I can't really show you anything, but I am going to go down to the table now, give you a good overview of how the game works, how you're going to put the table together, kind of set up how you're going to play, narrative and match play, go through all the motions of the mechanics and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll come back here and then talk review. So just for some visual flair here, here's kind of a table set up how I played my last game, through some of the models back out there. This is all terrain you can get from the old edition Kill Team, the old Kill Zones, some Shadow War Armageddon terrain. What I will say, just kind of looking at the table here, is the rules actually give a pretty cool indication of how to set up your table in a very clear way, and they define terrain in a very clear way. So that's a good kind of first kind of sort of positive check mark for the game, in terms of how easy it is to kind of just set it up, not get too bogged down. There are some nice little kind of nuance to that, which I'll show you. Now, there's some other little component bits and things like that that we're going to talk about. The first thing, and probably the biggest question that everybody's going to ask, is how do you actually measure things in the game? Well, first let me show you what the rulebook says. And I just want to point this out because there's been sort of a lot of gnashing of teeth about this online, and I think somewhat with good reason, but I just want to kind of walk it through with you. So the game's going to give you these two kind of like measurement devices here. And you don't necessarily have to measure with a ruler in inches. It gives you these little symbols here. So triangles are an inch, circles are 2 inches, squares 3 inches, and a hexagon here is 6 inches. That can be, I will 100% say and admit, that as you read through parts of the rules where it sort of explains line of sight and proximity to terrain, when you're reading through this rule book here, you can see there's circles and triangles. You can barely see the triangle there. And trying to sort of parse this language of these icons, it is a little bit trepidatious and vicious to read. But they give you these tools here. Now I have painted these up and also used some of the transfers for the Deathcore Krieg folks to mark this. So you can see I actually put a 6 on there, if it'll focus, on both sides of this. So this is a 6-inch little stick there, and this side here is 2 inches and 3 inches and 1 inches. So this makes it a little bit easier, and I kind of wish that anywhere it referenced these measurements, for example, here's a card, which I'll get to in a minute, if it had like a little 3 inside of this square or something, just so you could kind of have the best of both worlds. I think that would have made it a lot easier to parse that going through the rule book. I will say though, one interesting sort of thing to note, which I found out very quickly here, is you can see these little marks here. So it does pick up very quickly. You will be able to, once you can get through the rules, once you start to play, it does play out very well. So you can see these are actually broken in inches with this 6-inch measurement device here. So one of these here, that is the triangle, right? So that matches up there. The circle is the 2, right? So you see 2 inches there, and then you've got here the 3, which is halfway across, which is a square. So you're not having to like juggle these pieces back and forth. I don't even use these except for doing like setup. If I have to have like a deployment zone that's within 3 inches, this is just a very easy thing to throw down, or maybe I'm measuring the difference between terrain and stuff like that. So these are kind of handy to have and just leave out there like that. And then, so that's easy to do. Throughout the course of playing, I just used this. This was the only device I used. I never felt the need to use any other measuring device or ruler or anything like that. It was just this. If it was a circle, which is 2 inches, I just measured the 2 inches there. Piece of cake. So I just wanted to get that part out of the way regarding the measurement. So what I'm going to do here, make a little bit of an executive decision. I'm going to go through kind of the phases of a turn and get through that, and then we're going to talk about how like you're building your armies in match play and narrative play. So a turn is called a turning point in this game, and we have the initiative phase, the strategy phase, and then the firefight phase. And the firefight phase, as you expect, will be like the main meat and chunk of your game experience, moving models around, shooting each other, and that kind of stuff. So the initiative phase is going to be determined a little bit differently at the very, very start of the game, but we'll get there in a minute. But typically what you'll do is you'll roll off, and then whoever wins the roll will get the initiative. If there's a tie, then the initiative will just switch to whoever has it. And that will be the player that first activates their model, then the next player activates a model, and you go back and forth. The initiative phase will determine that, but it is a little bit different at the start of the game, which I'll talk about. And then you have the strategy phase. So the strategy phase is broke down into 3 pieces, and this is probably one of the most different pieces about the game compared to the previous edition in a couple of ways, and it has some similarities in some other ways. So the first thing you're going to do is generate command points, and command points are going to be things you can do to spend and do special actions during the turn, but also for these strategic ploys. Now if you have a leader in your group, where's my sergeant? So for example, my Death Watch here, they've got a sergeant, right? And so if there's a leader, you're going to start off with 2 command points to start the game. Now, not every kill team is going to necessarily have a leader, so you might start with nothing. But then every round, you're going to start to accrue command points. And these stay around for the whole game. Most games are 4 rounds, and any that you spend go away. But you can keep them and carry them over from round to round. And probably the most often thing I would say you do is going to be do it for the strategic ploys and then what's called a tactical ploy. Now strategic ploys happen now. They happen in the strategy phase. And to know what those are particular to a given army. So in this Octarius book is all of the specific rules for the Death Korps Krieg and the Orcs. So we're going to go in here. So we're just going to skip around some of this stuff. And then what you're going to look at here is strategic ploys. So these are all the strategic ploys that this particular team can do. And the Orcs have their own little list. And they vary from army to army, from team to team. And you can see here is the cost right here. So you can see 1 command point to do overcharge las guns, or 1 command point to do take cover. And you're going to spend those command points I talked about. And what the strategic ploys are going to do is they are more often than not going to have an effect over the entire round across your entire kill team, or at least a good chunk of your kill team. You're going to apply some special ability to them. And what you're going to do is go back and forth with the person that has the initiative, either passing or activating a strategic ploy, spending your command point, your opponent does it or passes, and then back and forth. Once both players pass, that phase is over, and we're going to go into the target reveal phase. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the tactical ploys. Now, the tactical ploys also cost command points, but you'll do these during the firefight phase, during the back and forth action. And these are little things that you can apply usually to like individuals in your kill team. Now, there is one tactical ploy that everybody gets access to. And this, as you can expect maybe, is called the command reroll. So you use this tactical ploy after rolling one of your attack or defense dice, and then you can re-roll that die. So you can spend 1 command point to re-roll maybe a crucial die. Everybody can do that. Other than that, each team has their own sort of specific tactical ploys. Okay, now the next thing you can do is the target reveal phase. And this is an interesting little piece of work here. So this box set comes with 2 decks of cards, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to get access to these cards outside of this box. You might be able to, but all of these are outlined in the rule book. I assume they will. It seems like you've got to do it because the rules specifically talk about shuffling up your deck of cards and so on. But so these, right now, the only way you can get them is in this box, but I would fully expect that you could get them elsewhere. So you've got 2 different decks of cards. These are identical decks of cards. Now what you do is you will look at your kill team. And let's go back here to the veteran guardsmen here, the Death Korps Corps. You can see there's an archetype security, right? So that they are a security type of kill team. Whereas if we look at the Orc Commando team, they are seek and destroy and infiltration, right? And so there are various different kill teams, and depending on which models you take, it might change what your archetype is. And so what you're going to do is you're going to pull 6 cards that match the archetypes of your kill team. So here we've got security and seek and destroy, right? So these are, maybe this is what the Death Watch were, I'm not sure. So here you've got 3 cards here. So what you do is you take 6 total cards. As long as all the cards match one of your archetypes, you can shuffle them into a deck of 6 cards. And then before the game, you're going to draw the 6 cards 2 at a time. You're going to choose 1 to keep and then 1 to throw away. So even you are not going to be 100% guaranteed to know exactly which of these tactical operation cards that you have. So you're going to build that prior to the game. And then at different points in the game, you're going to reveal these tac op cards. So this one, for example, says reveal this tac op in the target reveal step. So if we're back to our strategy phase after the command points, after the strategic ploys, if any of your cards say to reveal them during your target reveal step, that's when you will do it. Now, not all of these will happen in that case. Sometimes you might reveal after you've shot somebody or killed somebody or something like that. But if you have any of these, you can reveal these at that target reveal step, and they'll do some kind of effect. And you can see here again, they have these little measurements here, which is super annoying. But once you ingest those, then you'll kind of get it. So again, you're going to build a deck. You're going to build 6 of these, shuffle them up, draw 2 at a time, keep 1, discard the other, draw 2, keep 1. Now there are these sort of blank ones. See, it says faction tactical op, because remember, these ones are tied to an archetype. So if we're playing each other and we each have a security kill team, we might likely have similar tactical ops cards in our hand. But if you take a look at the narrative book for this particular box, there are 3 of these faction-specific tactical operations. So one of the first pages of rules in this Octarius book here is this tac ops. So you can see there's 3 tac ops here for the guardsmen and then 3 for the commandos. And so those reference these. And so when you play these, you can see faction tac op 1, faction tac op 2, faction tac op 3. So the implication here is that when they come out with other sort of narrative books, I'll talk about this more in the review. This is the one thing that sort of concerns me and kind of doesn't, we can talk around it in the review, is how specific and like tied down and sort of, boxed in they're going to make some of these rules where like, hey, I want to get this narrative rules for my Death Watch, but it's in this box that's, $150. I don't care about anything else in it. But that's kind of, there's a couple ways to look at that. So anyway, these are specifically tied to these teams. They don't apply to any other teams that you might actually use there. So you can, if you want, shuffle some of these into your initial deck of 6 and then theoretically draw them up there. So after you do that target reveal step, and it's similar where you go back and forth between players, and then once both players pass, we're going to go into the firefight phase. Now in the firefight phase is where you're going to move and shoot and all that kind of fun stuff. Now the first thing that the game has you do when you set up your models is mark it with an order. So you might have an engage order like that with a little target, or you might be a conceal order. Now I quickly moved away from doing that because when we played the games of it, 9 times out of 10, although not necessarily all the time, most of them were going to be engaged. So what I ended up doing is just marking the ones that are concealed as concealed, and then everything else was assumed to be engaged. Otherwise, you have these triangles all over the place, and it just gets a little bit messy and ugly and that kind of thing. Now, the other function of these markers here is to flip them over once that figure has activated. Now, they've had that in other, in Kill Team and Necromunda and other games like that. I personally never have a problem remembering which models are activated. I mean, once in a while, but not usually. So you could argue that, hey, you should use these two because then you can flip it over and mark it as activated. Well, you know what? I'm not going to forget. So, I mean, you can play that as you wish at your home. It's not a big deal. Now, there is a different state, though, a very, very important sort of piece to the game. That is going to be different based on if you are engaged or concealed. Concealed is going to allow you to kind of hide better and take advantage of cover a little bit better, but you can't do certain things like you can't charge and you can't do overwatch and that kind of stuff if you're concealed. But you are going to retain this into the next round after the first round, and then once you sort of go to activate that figure, at that point in future rounds you can change what your initial sort of activation thing is. So when you deploy them, you can sort of put them in concealment or put them in engaged, and then they'll retain that state. So they'll retain hidden until you get around to activating them in future rounds. But in the first round, the rules say this: in the first turning point, it has the order it was given when it was set up, and all subsequent turning points they can choose what order. So you're locked into that first round how you do it. And there is some sort of gamesmanship with it. I will say I do like this mechanic, even though the tokens might feel like a little bit of overkill if you were to use them. So we'll get into more of that in a minute. Now let's talk about the different actions that you can do. Now they all require a certain amount of action points. Now most of the models in the game will have 2 action points. So you could do like move for an action, shoot for an action, or whatever. Some of the models will have 3 action points. And maybe I haven't looked at every single model in the game, but maybe some only have 1 and some have 4. Now it is worth noting, unless you have a special rule to break this, you cannot repeat the same action. So you can't do a normal move twice. Now as far as I can tell, everything in the game moves 3 circles, or same thing as 6 inches. Now I'm not 100% sure if every single model will do that, but it seems like everybody just moves 6 inches. So that's very easy to remember. Now this is one of my gripes, the way that it describes how you move is a little bit cumbersome, but I can see it's actually over-explained or something. So it'll say, hey, you can move 3 circles. So I move 1 circle, and then I move another circle, and then I move another circle. But let's say he was a little bit closer here, and I just wanted to scooch out a little bit there. So I moved just up to here, right? Well, that's not my full circle, but I'm going to round it up or something like that, and then move this here, and then move it again. So the wording on that is something... It's obvious once you sit down and play it and sort of read through the rules, but it's basically like just move 6 inches. So if you moved up here a little bit, you move 1.5 inches that way. This whole round up thing, that's kind of chunky to me. I don't know if I really enjoy reading that or anything, but that's kind of like how I move anyway. So if I had a ruler here, I wouldn't probably move 1.5 inches. It's just out of sort of a habit and sort of kind of just what I've been doing for the last few years. I would just move, okay, I'll move him 2 inches this way, and then the rest will go that way. I don't like bend my ruler and stuff like that. That's how I see most people move their models around anyway. So it's just something about parsing, again, the symbols. I think that's the last thing I'm going to say about symbols, though. So you can do a normal move, which again is usually 3 circles or 6 inches. Then you can also make a dash, which is another action point, and you can dash for a square. So you can do an extra 3 inches. That's kind of like a run, right? So you can do a move and you can do a dash. That's not repeating the same action. A dash is always a square, no matter which model it is, even if their movement value is different. So that could be your 2 action points. Now you can charge as well. Charge is different than a normal move. When you charge, there are some stipulations though. When you charge, you can't also do a normal move, a dash, or what's called a fall back. So if you do a charge, you can't do any of those 3 movement types. But when you charge, you get an extra circle or an extra 2 inches. So you can move 8 inches on a charge. And that's the only time that you can come into sort of base-to-base contact here with another model and then get into melee fighting. So that's what you got to do there. Now, fall back is actually the only thing in the base sort of core system that costs 2 action points. So that will cost you, most of the time, your full turn. And at that point, you can do your normal move, but you have to stay out of engagement range. It's not base to base, I should say. It's the little triangle, the 1 inch. So within an inch, you have to be outside an inch of everything else when you do your fallback. And again, that costs you your full 2 action points. Now, if you wanted, you could sort of pass for an action point. You don't have to use, 2 moves or shoot in a fight or something. You could like move and pass for your other action point. There's also abilities so you could do a pickup action. So if you had like a little token on the board or something that you wanted to pick up, that will cost 1 action point. And a lot of the scenarios will have a particular action that you can do for that scenario, and those usually cost an action point as well. And a lot of times, while we're sitting here, that will involve these objectives. So when you're within, let's say, usually a circle or a triangle, 1 or 2 inches of an objective point, you will have to spend an action point as part of your turn to sort of just kind of activate or sort of explore or do some kind of interaction with that objective marker. And these are kind of double-sided. So if you wanted to keep track that you've activated it, because a lot of times these objectives and the scenarios can only be activated once for the round. So once, let's say my Death Watch player gets there and activates it, that doesn't mean the Zangor or Thousand Suns player can go over there and activate it again and get a victory point for themselves. We've already marked it as been activated, so they are double-sided. You can flip them over, and that's kind of nice. Now, the next thing you can do is shoot for an action point or fight for an action point. And for that, I want to show you kind of a sample data card here, just so you can see all the stuff. So here we've got the move, right? 3 circles. Everybody moves 3 circles or 6 inches. This is your action point limit. So you've got 2 action points for these Commando Breach Boy models. This GA is a group activation. And I think everything in this book only has 1, which just means if you're going to activate one of these models, you just activate one of them. Some of them will have 2. So if you activate one of them, you get to immediately activate another one. I've not seen any with 3, but that can be a thing. So you can activate them as a group. And there's no proximity or anything. So they could be completely across the board, which is kind of interesting. So typically that's 1. You just activate the 1 model. Then you have defense dice, and then the save value, and then the total number of wounds. So how does an attack work? So there's a couple of profiles on here, right? And some special abilities down here. You've got a ranged attack here, you can see with the little targeting reticle, and then the little 2 swords as a melee attack. So let's say this guy's going to shoot with a slugga. He's got a 4 there. He's going to roll 4 dice, and then he's looking for a 4+. So we'll just roll this for fun. And so he got 2 hits there. These 3s are misses. So all things being equal, if there was no blocking or anything, he would do 3 damage with the first one and then 4 damage with the 6, because the 6 is a critical. So anytime you roll a 6, you're going to take the second value, and that applies for shooting and fighting. Now, most guns don't have a range. Their range is the entire board because it's a small confined space and you can reach all the way across, and you should have tons of terrain blocking line of sight. Some of them do have a range. Like this slugga has a very relatively short range of a hexagon, so 6 inches. So this is a very close range weapon. And pistols and things like that will have a smaller range and so on. Now, some of the weapons here have a critical ability. So in addition to the critical damage, if there's a sort of special ability here, this will trigger on a critical. So this melee weapon in this case gets a brutal special ability, which I'll show you in a minute, on a 6. But let's say he was attacking, let's say effectively himself. Somebody else had 3 defense dice and a 5+. So when they get a shot at, So we've got the 2 hits here, right? The critical and the regular one. He's going to roll with that. He's looking for 5 ups, which is tough. He didn't get any of them, so we're going to apply 3 damage and then 4 damage, so a total of 7. Now if he gotten a 5, any regular success here, so anything that beats your target value, can block a regular success. Now if he had rolled a 6, that would be kind of a critical save. That could block any other 6s across like that. So let's say he rolled this, like so. These 2 failed, but he did roll a crit, so that's going to block that. Only the 3 damage will get through. Very, very simple on the shooting attack. Now if you are in cover, and cover is going to vary based on if you're concealed, but what you can do is, let's go back to this example here. We say he got his 2 attacks there, and then those got through. This is the defense dice. If you're technically in cover, you can allocate one of the dice that you would roll as kind of an automatic success, and then you just roll the rest of them there. So he get at least 1 sort of block there. And then any damage taken over, you will remove that many wounds. So he starts with 10 wounds, and then once you get to 0, you pull them on him. Now before we talk about cover and terrain, which is important, since we're standing here, let's talk about melee combat. So let's say this guy again was fighting sort of a mirror of himself. You've got 3 attacks here on a 3+, so he's going to roll those. Okay, so again we've got 1 success and 1 crit. And then the defender, let's say they had the same stats, 3 attacks, whoops, and then they need a 3-up, so like that. That's a good example here. So what happens though is they're not rolling the defense. When you're in melee, the defender is also picking a weapon and using that to sort of have immediate combat face to face with their attacker. So you're going to roll up both dice, and you're going to be able to see, okay, so I've got a critical and you've got a success and a critical. So starting with the attacker, you can choose to set aside a die to parry one of the incoming attacks, and that will remove one of the successes from your opponent. Or if you set aside a critical, like in this case, this is a good example. I'm going to set aside this critical, so I'm going to lose it. I'm not going to be able to apply it offensively, but that's going to remove that die out of my opponent's pool. And again, they're out of dice, so then I can just apply this as a strike. So you apply your successes either a strike or a parry. So I think exactly that's what this player would do. They'd say, oh, I don't want this damage coming back to me, and then I'll apply that directly. So you go back and forth choosing. Attacker chooses first, and then defender chooses. So it's theoretical, some of these weapons have big damage. You might have a lot of successes. So there'll be a little bit of a quick back and forth game. It doesn't really take too long. And then whatever damage is left over, of course, is going to be applied to each other. So let's talk about cover. So if we go here, and this starts at page 70, there's a nice little section here on line of sight and what cover means what, and what terrain does what terrain is obscured and covered, and so on. And it gives you a definition of what it means to be obscured and covered. Now, if you are engaged, then you are visible if you've got line of sight and you're not obscured. Obscured is like the heaviest cover. If you are concealed, you're visible if you've got line of sight, visible, not obscured, not in cover. So you get an easier time of it if you are concealed to be able to apply that cover effect again to set an automatic defense die as a success. And there will be special abilities and stuff that interact with that. Maybe you can set it as a critical success. You get like a special ops or something that kind of beefs that up and makes that better. So if we go here, what it does a good job of is giving you these terrain keywords here. So you've got heavy. So heavy provides cover and is obscuring. Okay, so that means here, if I'm engaged, I can effectively glean cover from it if I'm within an inch. That's what that little triangle is that you can't see. Now, if it was just providing cover, so light terrain here is not obscuring. Light terrain just provides cover, right? And so the way that you draw cover here is this little thing, which I'll zoom into right here. So if you have to draw from a point on your base to every point on the defending model, if any of it goes through a particular piece of terrain, then they have cover. But again, that depends on if you're engaged or if you are concealed. And obscuring will basically give cover to everybody. Only cover, sort of light cover, let's call it, will give cover to, again, concealed figures, not engaged figures. And the other cool thing that it does here, let's flip up a little bit, it talks about climbing and yada, yada, yada. Example boards that I'll show you, is it defines here very specific terrain pieces, and it says this is a pipe, this is light and traversable, this is a low wall, this is light and traversable, this is a wall, this is heavy. So heavy means obscuring. So that means anybody can hide here, whereas only concealed figures can hide here. Just to digress here, the terrain that comes in this Arcturus box set, you're going to build it a certain way, right? And so this is going to give straight up tell you what parts of the terrain are traverse and heavy and all this stuff. And you'll have certain abilities here, like these scrap piles. These will cost you different action points. So you kind of have these new actions built into the games that use these scrap piles. And the narrative missions that are in this tell you exactly where to put this terrain out and stuff like that. And I'll explain this in a minute. But it's cool because it tells you, okay, you've got this, this, and this. And so everybody's going to know what the terrain does. And it's very clear. And it gives you a good language about describing the terrain, because obviously I'm not using all these exact pieces, but we said, okay, that's heavy, that's light, and that's traversable, etc. So that's the gist of how you play. You move around, you shoot each other, you try to interact with the different objectives or different terrain on the board to do different actions. Let's do a little bit of the pre-match sequence. I'll talk a little bit about the narrative stuff and kind of the extracurricular stuff now. So there's just a couple of pieces I want to glean out of this. I'm showing you the match play mission sequence. The open play is open, it's pretty loosey-goosey. The narrative play is the exact same as this, except with one little step that kind of is the aftermath sequence that's not shown here. So first you'll figure out a mission, and there's 9 missions in here, there's 9 missions in here, so you got a whole mess of missions to go through. You're gonna read the mission, determine everything else, set the terrain up. It gives you some good examples of terrain. Specifically in here, it's a good kind of general layout for some of these. And let's just talk about that real quick here. So for example, you can see this here. It gives you the block. And so even if you don't want to use this terrain, you want to maybe play this type of mission with some other terrain and mix it up, you know that this is heavy, you know this is a scrap pile, you know that's light. So you can find the appropriate terrain to kind of match this layout and kind of set things up in a more balanced way. And the other thing to know about this is you see these little squares here. These match this 22 by, was it 40? Something like that. 22 by 40 board. All of these squares here are an inch. They are effectively a triangle in measurement here. So you can take this out here and easily measure out this stuff. So you go, oh, that's 3 inches there. And it makes it really easy to digest and all that kind of stuff. So that's a good way to kind of set it up. Then you're going to select here your drop zone, it says, and so this is the area where you deploy there. And then you're going to select your kill team. And this is kind of a neat thing because the way this is read is you really just pick a faction and then you just come to the game with the kill team. If you're doing narrative play, you're going to kind of slowly build up your kill team, and some folks are going to die, you're going to add new ones, but you're always going to come to the game with a strictly legal kill team. If you were thinking of pointing it out, there are no points in this game. The kill team rules themselves just give you a fixed number of models within a certain sort of parameter set of options that you can use. So there are no points. You just always come to the game with theoretically a legally balanced kill team. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then you're going to select your tactical ops cards, and that's again building this deck before the game. And then you have here the equipment. Now each of the armies has different equipment, and you spend up to 10 equipment points that you only have access to for your kill team. Now in narrative this is different because you won't necessarily start off with any equipment in your supply there. But you can get some what's called requisition points when you build your army for the first time in narrative. You get some requisition that you can spend to set up with, you can spend and get some equipment. But no matter what you're playing, no matter how much equipment you might have gained over the course of a narrative campaign, you can only bring 10 points of it max to a battle. Then you're going to set up barricades, and this is awesome. I love this part of the game. So each team here can set up these two of these barricades, right? And so you get 2 of these, and what you do is you have to put them within 6 inches of your deployment zone, wherever that is, and you just plop them where you want. So you might put them in an advantageous place, kind of in relationship to an objective or whatever, maybe kind of extending a piece of covering terrain or something like that. And so you're going to go back and forth, and each player is going to do that at least twice, and there's an option to actually do it a 3rd time. But that's the next step you're going to do. And again, I really like that. And then you're going to set up the operatives, and the defender always sets up all of theirs first, and then the attacker sets up all of those. And you have to give them again an order, an engage or conceal order, to kind of set their initial state. And then there is a scouting phase, but unlike the last edition, you have to do this. Like this, you have to do the scouting phase, but it is very, very simple. Basically what you do is you're going to take a die in your hand, and you're going to set it or just reveal it, and you're going to show a number 1, 2, or 3. If you fortify, you pick a 1, you can set up another piece of another barricade. If you infiltrate, It says once during the first turning point, excuse me, when you select a ready friendly operative to activate, you can change its order. So remember, you have to set everybody up with the order. You can actually change one of them in the first turn. And then recon is you can perform a free dash. So that's somebody can get a free 3-inch movement, and that's going to dictate based on who picks who gets the initiative. So if I pick fortify and you pick infiltrate, I will get the initiative. Whereas if I picked fortify and you picked recon, you can see the arrow that way, you would get the initiative. And if they both pick the same, the initiative stays with the attacker. And then you start the battle and away you go. And you get victory points for the mission itself here. You get victory points out of effectively using these tactical operations cards, which is going to be huge. Basically about a third of your points probably come from these because they do kind of max out the points. And there's some other stuff like that. So let's talk quickly about the match play stuff, and then I'll talk very quickly about how to build a kill team. It's super easy. So here we go, narrative play. And so they give you some stuff to photocopy here. This small critique on this, and also the narrative data cards, which are in the back here. I made use of these. I can't show them to you because they have information from the compendium in there. But I wish this was a little bit different, but it's not a big deal because definitely the fan community is going to come up with cool ways to build your army and print out like a spreadsheet and stuff like that. So not a big deal with that, but this could have been a little bit tighter, I think. So what's going to happen is you're going to get experience though for your different ranks, and you get experience for like killing enemies. If a model gets a victory point during the course of the scenario, they'll get an experience point. And then as they start to rank up, you're going to go up to adept, veteran, ace, grizzled, revered. So this is different than the specialties that we used to have. And it's not actually something that doesn't exist in match play as those specialties. So in narrative though, you're going to go up this, and once you get the first level adept, you have to pick a specialty: combat, staunch, marksman, or scout. But there are special ones in this narrative book for these two kill teams. Again, just for these guys, not for the other teams. And so you're going to pick here, and then what you're going to do is you can either roll or choose. So let's say I pick combat. It gives you 6 options, but once you have selected combat, the first time you level up to adept, next time you go up to veteran, ace, whatever, the next skill is going to come from that same sort of school there. So they're just going to be focused on that. So they're start to accrue a lot of abilities there. So that's going to happen after the game. And then you have casualties here. If you're out, you've got to roll a battle scar, which could slay you. If you have a medic that lived through your match, then you can re-roll one of these for each medic. And then you can do a recovery test. So you can remove a scar from a previous match. You can't remove a scar that you just got this match, but if you've still got one hanging out from a previous match, you can do that. And then you have what's called the base of operations here. And this doesn't really mean anything, but it feels like it could mean something later. There's not really any sort of indicative stuff in here. But there is a spot actually on the sheet to fill out your base of operations. It could just be a narrative sort of flavor thing. But some of the missions will give you ranged equipment depending on how well you do, or sometimes you'll have what's called a spec ops, which we'll get to in a minute, that will give you the the rare equipment, not ranged, rare. So in addition to the faction specific equipment here that you can see, this is for the commandos, you can get some rare equipment. And there's even more rare equipment in the narrative book, which I'll show you in a sec. So next thing here, these are strategic assets. These you can buy again with the requisition points. You start with 4 requisition points that you can spend right away. So you could have some strategic assets. These will give you kind of general abilities, kind of like your base abilities if you played Frostgrave. And then you might have, here's the requisitions that you can spend. So you can have a max 5. You can never go over 5 requisition points. You start with 4, and some of these can be used to, again, acquire kind of starting equipment, starting strategic assets, and so on. And if you win, scenarios and complete your spec ops, which I'll show you now, you can get extra requisitions. And these spec ops here are the core rule spec ops, and there's some spec ops in here that are specific. Again, there's 2 per kill team that are only for these kill teams for this sort of narrative campaign. But you can pick these here, and these will give you steps. And this is a lot like the newer Path to Glory stuff and the Warcry narrative stuff, where you pick something and you're kind of like on your own individual quest. And so it'll say, a lot of them have to do with these TAC Ops cards. So it's like, do 5 missions where you use these certain TAC Ops cards, and then do another mission that uses this TAC Ops card. And then once you do that, you'll sort of solve that and finish that quest and finish that, you know, sort of path to glory type of thing. And then it gives you some stuff, some rewards, and then you just keep playing. You just do a different one. And so that's how that works. And that there's not really any winner or loser of a campaign like there was in the last edition. There's no, you know, resources to track or anything like that. It's all just sort of your own sort of individual path to glory quest thing. Anyway, here's the narrative stuff. And again, here's a bunch of the missions and stuff. These missions here don't tell you how to set out terrain. There are some general rules to that, but you can, you know, use your best judgment and stuff like that. Now in the narrative stuff here, let's take a look. And we'll just take a look a little bit at how to build a kill team here. So let's zoom in actually on this veteran guardsman team again. So all of the kill teams read just like that. And it's possible that they may come out with other configurations for other kill teams, and that's kind of how it works. Is depending on which kill team you pick, you may not have like any Thousand Sun Marines or Death Watch or whatever. You can kind of think of it in a lot of different ways, but this one's very particular to this box. So a veteran guardsman kill team consists of 10 veteran guardsmen and 1 ancillary support option. So the 10 guardsmen are as follows. You got to have 1 sergeant, right? And then 9 guardsmen. But anything other than trooper, veteran, confidant, zealot, these can only be picked once. So you can pick regular trooper, veteran up to 9 times. So you could have a sergeant and the 9 veterans. But these other ones here, and you can see these are some of the carryovers from the last edition zealot, comms, demolition. So there is some specialisms here that are sort of baked into how you build your kill team. But what's going to happen is, let's take a look here. So ancillary support, these are like some special rules for the guardsmen, and these are some special abilities for your leader. Again, the strategic ploys, these are your pre-game command actions, your in-game command actions. Here's all of your data cards here, which I took to photocopying these because it's just much easier to reference. And you have different keywords and stuff like that. So here's your leader keyword on your sergeant, veteran, and so on. And some of them have special abilities, and like I said, some of you can only take once, and so those are usually ones that have some cooler abilities, and they're a little bit better, of course. And then you have the equipment that you can take. So pre-game, again, you can spend 10 equipment points. So you can see this hotshot capacitor pack takes 2. You can do that. And then here's a particular specialist, a veteran guardsman specialist. So when you level up these guys in a narrative campaign, they have 1 extra option that you can choose as a specialist thing as you level up. And the orcs have the same. And then they also have their own special rare equipment, their own special assets above and beyond the core team. So again, these are only in this narrative book for these 2 teams. And you have their own special requisitions, their own spec ops too. So these are the 2 additional spec ops, and the same thing for the commando team. And in the back, there's a whole mess of the different scenarios and everything like that. So that's a pretty good rundown of everything in the box. Showed you how to play, how to work through your firefight phase, the spec ops, the tactical ops, the different ploys and all that kind of fun stuff. So let's go back to my talking head. Okay, so that was kind of a long overview, I think, of Kill Team. The new edition, I think this is the 5th edition, if you want to be super technical about it. Again, when I played through this, I was using Death Watch, Sisters of Battle, Genestealer Cults, and Thousand Suns. That's information that's in here. I will, if enough people give me a comment, I will do a video kind of overviewing this stuff, which I have had a chance to look through several of the kill teams, and I'll spend a little bit more time this week going through it. There's some interesting stuff there, and we'll talk about sort of the implications of what this is in this box and how it might apply to like the overall ecosystem of Kill Team. So let's go through my 3 kind of pillars of review here. Now, player count and play time doesn't really apply. It's a 2-player game. In my experience, the play time is pretty quick. It's like less than an hour for a single match. Now, granted, I'm familiar with this kind of game and familiar with the last edition of Kill Team and Shadow War and Necromunda and all that stuff. I think if you're a new player just picking this up, it probably would take you a little over an hour, maybe up to an hour and a half or so to play through, because there is a little bit of kind of like a front-loaded sort of workload once you get into the game. So just that little caveat there. I'll talk more about that in just a second, but I could see it taking up to like 90 minutes or so once you're really starting to kind of get into the game. Then that should come down pretty sharply to under an hour. Now, what is this game like? Well, obviously, that's my 3rd pillar, and I would have to compare this to the last edition of Kill Team and everything else and other games kind of in this genre, obviously like Necromunda or whatever else, I don't know, Stargrave. I felt like when I first started to play this and I first read the rules, I was like, this is not a Games Workshop game. Not good or bad in any sort of judgment there. It was like, this feels very, very different because you've got a lot of things kind of going on. Now let's just kind of work through all of the kind of changes here. First is how you build the kill team, right? There's no points, which is really a breath of fresh air. And I feel like effectively you're getting basically the same kill teams as you would have got last edition. Like, it's about the same number of models and the same kind of models because you can only take, one heavy gunner and all this kind of stuff. So it feels effectively the same, and you still get your configuration fun where you can I'll use this gun, or I'll use this gun, or I'll use this, person with this icon or whatever. And you still get to play around, but the number crunching is removed, and you really don't need any kind of app or anything to build the kill team whatsoever. You just look at that and say, I can take 2 of these and 4 of these or whatever, and then away I go. And that's really cool. I think that's a really good change, and I think that's something that games shouldn't be afraid to do. I think it's a great change. It's I don't want to call it courageous, but I think it's a somewhat courageous step forward. It's like, get rid of points. Let's just have it so you can just lay it out. And they do give you a mix of different kill team styles and stuff that you can take. So again, all that sort of configurability is really there. So that's cool. The next thing kind of moving forward is when you sort of approach the beginning of the game, when you get to your scenario, whatever you're playing. And I will say one interesting thing about it is the scenarios in here are not necessarily marked as narrative or match play. And I think that's good because it seems like you can use them in either situation. And there's no reason if you're playing narrative not to play something that's balanced. You could set something up sort of unbalanced, but that's kind of up to you to decide. And maybe we'll see some more support in that direction, but I don't know that we really need to. So once you kind of get that stuff set up and then you come to the scenario and you're ready to okay, now I'm going to build my tactical operations deck. And you've got to go through and say, okay, well, I know I'm playing Thousand Suns, or I know I'm playing the Orc Commandos. And I kind of, as you start to learn what the cards in your deck are that are going to be applicable to the style of kill team that you chose. I mean, that's something else. Even within a given faction, you can say, well, I don't really like doing these recon cards. Maybe I'll do these other guys, and I'm going to do the security one, or, the infiltration cards or something like that. So you can tick and tack your gameplay choices based on that approach there. So it's like you're choosing your faction abilities in a way. And then you got to shuffle them up. You draw 6 cards that you want to have in there. You're pretty sure you want to have them in there. And then you draw 2, keep 1, draw 2, keep 1, draw 2, keep 1 until you have 3. And then that's what you got. And they are hidden secret objectives to get you up to 6 points. Because typically you'll max out scoring 2 points per card. And then you think you max at 12 points that you can score for the objectives in this scenario. So that whole approach to the game already is very, very different than things that we've seen before. To me, those cards are going to be that first sort of learning curve as you get into the game, because the team building is super easy. The cards can be very interesting, and learning about how and when they apply, because a lot of them you'll play in the first round and be like, this is what I'm doing, and I'm going to try to do this as soon as possible. Other ones you're kind of keeping back and playing creepy with to play at the right time and kind of as a surprise. So that's a very different feel than I think most Games Workshop games. Now the next part of it is, you start deploying the models. Again, I love the deploying of the barricades. This is such a simple thing that I was just like, this is so cool, because you have this basic terrain set up. You got the big stuff there and there, but it's like, I really want to deploy this little barricade, give myself a little bit of cover. And even that sort of beginning motions, you're starting to sort of telegraph a little bit to your opponent, well, he's interested in this area of the board or this area of the board. And you can see, oh, they put their one sniper there, or something like that. Then you're going to try to move up there. So that's such a cool little simple piece of the setup that just takes 2 seconds, but it's immediately engaging to me, I think, to sit there and you're already messing with each other and saying, oh, you put that barricade there, why did you put it over there? You're already right into the game right at that setup there. And then the whole scouting phase where you're picking 1, 2, or 3, maybe you set up another barricade, you kind of move somebody up a little bit. That's pretty cool, and it's a lot simpler than the old scouting phase, but it feels like it actually has some impact on the game compared to the last edition, so it's a nice change there. And then once you get into the the actual actions of the game, again, I harped this in this walkthrough, there's a little bit of a barrier because they chose all the shapes and symbols and stuff like that. Once you get the game, if you get the game and get the rule book, you're going to sit down and be like, oh my gosh, what a headache to read it this way. Now, the rules in their core and what they mean and how you're going to do this is not that difficult, but just the parsing of the information for me was difficult. Not needlessly so. Once I sat down and played it, and I was like, did I do that right? Oh, okay. Of course, that makes perfect sense. This is how it should work. And, there's just that level of it. Now, again, I showed you the trick with the rulers and the measurements. If you skip to the review here, go back to the beginning of the walkthrough. I talk about that pretty quick at the beginning. I did some stuff to the measurement devices that come in the game, and there's basically, you could just use the long hexagon one and just use that and forget the others if you really wanted to. So it makes it easy, and it is super simple and easy. And again, they took out the range of most weapons, so you're not even worried about range, and anytime you are, it's usually the 6-inch hexagon one, and it's a pistol or a flamethrower or something. And that's the only time you measure range, and that's it. So it is pretty simple there. And again, even though it's hard to parse, I did find the explanation of the terrain and the defining of the terrain and how that's done and how cover and obscuring and all that stuff is done in the whole sort of interaction with the engage order versus the conceal order. Very, very concise and clear. Very easy to figure out what's going on in the battlefield and how things are working and what terrain means and where what's going to happen when I move here, right? And so I think that deserves some credit for that. So the next part would be the new dice rolling, right? So this is, there's a ton of games that don't roll dice like Games Workshop, so I don't mind it, honestly. I know a lot of people are like, I don't like to roll the hit, to roll the wound, to roll the save, to do the ward save, to roll whatever the special ability is. I get it. Sometimes it's a little bit tedious. I don't mind it because I have plenty of other games that don't do it, so it's not a big deal. This is very different feeling in a way. It's a little bit more efficient, and I think it's interesting because this I got to sit and sort of live with for a little bit, but you roll basically those pools of dice, and instead of models having 1 or 2 hit points, they have 7 up to like 14 or something. I'm just making that up, but I've seen some with 14, but there's probably some with higher. So instead of like a model not really doing anything, you're at least going to shave some wounds off it. And one thing I did not mention in the walkthrough was once you get to less than half your wounds, which is, I think, having this mechanic is indicative of having like a pool of wounds instead of 1 or 2. Once you get to less than half, you put an injured token next to the guy, and they lose an action point, and then they lose like 1 inch off their movement and -1 on their attacks. I'm making that off the top of my head. I think I'm totally covering it, but it's nice because now that you have a pool of wounds, you can kind of shave some off, and maybe a big, Space Marine type of guy or whatever, a big orc, you can kind of knock them down a little bit. So even though they're not dead, you still sort of change their effectiveness, which is fun. So you still get some good positive feedback from, the actions that you do instead of like, oh, I rolled 4 dice and nothing happened. So that's a good change as well. And I really like the shooting is kind of neither here nor there. That still feels kind of the same to me. If you take out that whole injury idea, effectively that kind of still feels the same. It didn't really gain or lose anything by doing that. I think it's probably a little bit more satisfying. Now where it's a lot better, I think, is in the fighting, where instead of rolling attack and defense or whatever, or just rolling off both attack, you're picking weapons, right? You're engaged in a quick like little duel of dice, and you're parrying and you're striking and all that stuff, and it works very, very quick. It doesn't really slow the game down. It's actually a very exciting part of the game because like these two are interacting, and you could get slashed in the face even though you're the attacker. That's a cool little back and forth, and I really appreciate that side of the game. So that's kind of the general mechanical stuff about it. Before I talk into some of the ecosystem and the narrative stuff, I will say this. At the beginning I said this doesn't really feel like a Games Workshop game. But the more I played of it, I was like, no, this does feel like a kind of natural evolution of the previous kill team and even the previous kill teams before that. So if you go back to the beginning of the video, I talked about how Kill Team was basically 40K but smaller. But over time, it's really been kind of growing away from that into its own game. And I think at this point, it's really fully detached itself from the main 40K game. And that feels like a good spot for it to be in. It still has the same kind of vibes as last game with the command points and that kind of stuff, and the juggling of that resource is still really cool. The tac ops card kind of layered on top of that and that kind of thing. But the simplification of the combat, they've kind of moved some of that complexity again to the front loaded part of it, where you're picking your tac ops, you're picking your the strategic ploys at the beginning and all that kind of stuff. You pick 10 points of equipment at the beginning, so there's some extra kind of crunchiness and complexity there in terms of the choices that you make there. So they've kind of offset the complexity, moved it kind of to the front of the game before the game, whereas the end game is just like bucket of dice, boop, okay, 10 damage, whatever, done. So that's kind of an interesting thing, and it's kind of a cool place for it to be. I know a lot of people were kind of worried about I don't know if they were worried, but they were kind of like, oh, they're just going to make it like Warcry, just really dumbed down. I love Warcry, so I would bet, this does feel like they did do that in a way. They kind of did it in the right way, and it still feels like a 40K, still feels like Kill Team, but I think they just kind of took some of the design aspects and some of the stuff they've been exploring. This is all me making this up, but theoretically, as whatever studio or part of the studio did this, they took kind of some of those concepts and those feelings and tried to sort of apply it to this environment. Okay, enough of that nonsense. So the other thing, and this probably could be, I think it's a concern. I talked about this in the walkthrough, but I'm not sold that it's a concern. And that is, let me reach over here, excuse me. That's this book here, this Octarius book. And I did say at the beginning that I am very interested in putting this stuff together and playing through the campaign stuff that is directly in here. So there's a lot of very specific stuff for the Death Krieg Corps and the Orc stuff in here, and it's only available to these two teams. But what it does give you is a very rich sort of setting, a very rich sort of environment to play through, and this looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. And the problem is that this is sort of a fear that maybe I'm carrying over from the last edition, and I know a lot of the other folks in the Kill Team community have expressed this kind of same thing, where they're going to come out with these themed box sets like they did with Pariah Nexus and Arena and Rogue Trader, and they're going to lock certain things behind those themed box sets, right? So this is all speculation, but it might be possible, for example, that you cannot get access to some of these rules outside of this box set. Now, it would be silly if they didn't release the Death Krieg Corps and the Orc Commandos as their own separate little boxes just for the models. I think they even said they're going to do that for sure, and also the Orc terrain is all going to be separate. So you can get all that stuff separately if you miss out on this box. But they did have a tendency to like pack rules for other kill teams in like a narrative, what should be just like a purely narrative expansion box set. And I really hope that doesn't turn out to be the case, because then you get this whole like chase mentality, which is just shouldn't exist in this kind of, this should just, in my opinion, should not be a way to sort of do an SKU. So that's a little bit concerning, but I'm not sure, because it also isn't that big of a deal. Because if you really wanted to get this with a friend and sit down, let's play through Octarius. You'll be the Orcs, I'll be the Deathcore Kree. There is a huge wealth of information in here, a huge wealth of scenarios and extra fun narrative stuff. And it's a really cool package. So I don't want to come off like purely sort of, jaded and a little bit cynical about it, because if you just kind of forget about the larger ecosystem and the overall health of the game and all that stuff, if you just kind of look at this box in kind of a vacuum of like two buddies picking this up, there's going to be so much cool stuff in this, a lot in terms of gameplay and all the models and terrain, everything you can get. It is a really cool package. So my recommendation, of course, would be to pick this up. But I am a little bit kind of leery of, okay, well, these guys have all these extra narrative stuff. They got their own specific spec ops. They got their own tactical ploys and special ploys and all that stuff, and you know, their own specific rare equipment. And you know, okay, what about the other teams? What are they going to get? So maybe they'll have some other narrative books that you can get, which I think is the way to go. I don't really know, but I also don't know what kind of drives, what needs to be there to drive sales to keep the game healthy and alive. So there's a balancing act there as well. That's just kind of like the little minor concern there, Dan. So kind of just to sum up, I know this is going to be a long one, but I'll just work through recommendations. The box set, recommend. If you're going to get this, get with a friend, play through the 2 teams, you're good to go. Lots of good info in here. The core rulebook, which will be available separately. So I guess recommending the core rulebook. I do recommend the game apart from the box set, right? That's what I'm trying to say. If you're not interested in the box set, you don't want to play these 2 teams, but you want to play the new kill team, then again, if you want me to go through this compendium, I will, but I got to wait a week because of the NDA. But I would say my recommendation at this point is I would recommend it. I think this is a nice sort of gradual progression. I was a little bit on the fence, to be honest with you, if I would keep around the last edition Kill Team stuff, and I still might. I mean, it's just really a collection of books, and I have this terrain now, which will be useful here. So there's not really, I wouldn't really be getting rid of anything. I mean, maybe the books, but they take up so little space on my shelf, there's no reason not to keep them. I think I'm going to hang on to them a little bit, because I really did like that, and I really do like some of the narrative there. The narrative, though, here is much more fleshed out, and that was kind of my main gripe with the last edition. So I think I may end up, you know, moving away from that. Yeah. So, but anyway, I'm kind of wishy-washy because I haven't really made up my mind on that one. The other thing that was interesting is I kind of was going through and thinking about the history of Kill Team, and I pulled up in the Shadow War Armageddon book that I still had laying around, and I was like, man, this looks like it'll be a lot of fun too. So, because I really do enjoy Necromunda, and it basically is like playing Necromunda with that. And the campaign rules for that are actually really simple, kind of like last edition of Kill Team. But I was like, after playing this for a few games, I'm like, it's kind of nice to like have both, because you can just use the models across these different systems. So it's kind of nice to keep some books around. And that's not something I usually do. I moved on pretty quickly from 8th edition into 9th, and more so from Warhammer Age of Sigmar into the 3rd edition. Now I'm like everything is in the rearview window. But for some reason with this one, I do like to kind of keep those extra books around, and some of because there were just so many cool rules for the kill zones and all that kind of stuff, and I really liked how it was put together. Although the narrative as a whole was lacking. So I think I've rambled on long enough. But you've got my recommendations there. Definitely take a look at it, and thanks.